So now we're moving on to Deadman Wonderland. Now if you know anything about this show, then you already know that the Wonderland in this show is not fun at all. You'll see why when I explain the plot, so here it goes. So it begins that Japan is pretty much fucked up due to an earthquake that happened where it actually sunk most of the island. So 10 years after that event, it actually takes place of a character named Gonta, and he happens to be a very ordinary student. So during one very unlucky day, someone wearing a big red outfit that does not look suspicious whatsoever breaks through the window and just totally massacres everyone. But Gonta happened to be the only survivor there, but the only thing that happened to him was that he actually got a red crystal shard into his chest. But other than that, no injuries whatsoever. But as for everyone else, yeah, they had a terrible day. So that event happened to be called the Massacre of the Red Man. So Gonta has been taken into court, and because he's like the only witness, they ended up arresting everyone there because they're all dicks. And because this crime was so huge, he ended up being sent to a prison called Deadman Wonderland. So the prison is being ran by a guy named Tusanaga, and all I have to say is that he is quite possibly the most craziest son of a bitch I've ever seen. Now I'm gonna go a little bit off track here, just because I have a really funny story to tell. I remember when me and a friend of mine were first watching this show, my friend brought up something and he's like, yeah, you know, he kinda reminds me of Nier from Death Note, mainly because he's a grown man who likes to play with toys. So we just made up a theory that this guy is actually Nier from Death Note if he was much older, and because he was so smart in that show. Now, there is a saying, but I can't remember exactly how it goes, but I think it goes along like, there's a difference between smart and then genius, and then of course after genius, you can be so smart where you actually become crazy. I could have sworn that Albert Einstein was the one that said that. Well, the whole point is that I really do believe that this guy is actually Nier in the future if he went crazy. And of course had a name change and a ridiculous haircut. Okay, let's get back on track here. So yeah, he's an asshole. So the prison Deadman Wonderland is a place where all the criminals go, and it happens to be inside a theme park, and everything on the outside is just so happy and leprechauns are going around, but no, instead it's actually fucking hell. So he just happens to be the only innocent person there. And one of the ways how you have to survive the prison is that you have to get a certain amount of money. And to get a lot of it, you have to take part in a survival game called Corpse Carnival. What that is, that it's pretty much like a fight to the death. But sometimes it could also be an obstacle course. So in other words, it's almost exactly like the Running Man, but you know, minus Arnold Schwarzenegger and also minus the one-liners. And beyond most of the ridiculousness. Although I guess the setting would kind of be like it. I mean, everything here is just so damn happy looking, but then there's like blood everywhere. But during some of those one-on-one fights, probably the worst thing is that if you actually lose, you have to take a slot machine, and whatever is result, they had to remove it from you. And one guy is so unlucky, he gets his eyeball removed. Yeah, that part is just so fucking cringy. So yeah, whoever came up with this is a sick fuck. I just figured I might as well explain that first. So something else I have to say is that he eventually meets someone named Shiro. So Gonta knows nothing about her, but she happens to know plenty of stuff about him. But they are really just childhood friends, but he doesn't remember anything. So usually they like to help each other out. So while Gonta is in the prison just trying to survive with Shiro, he's always trying to figure out who this red man is. Now in case you're wondering how he fights back when he has to go to the carnival is that he can actually control his own blood. But the way how he controls it is mostly that he can actually shoot like balls of blood at people to a point where it actually hurts them. Yeah, it's kind of a weird power, but hey, at least it's kind of interesting. So one more thing I have to say before we end the plot is that, after surviving a bunch of rounds in the Corpse Carnival, he gets recognized by someone named the Owl. Although his real name is actually Nagi, but everyone has their nicknames where they're based after birds. Like Gonta is known as the Woodpecker, Senji is known as the Crow, and no, not the comic book series where the guy dies and comes back and goes for a revenge story, although that would be pretty damn awesome. And then Kariko is known as the Fowl. And finally, I mentioned is Mitsuki is known as the Hummingbird. So anyways, the Owl runs a small group of rebels that are trying to escape Deadman Wonderland, and he wants Gonta to join them. So eventually he does, but let me tell you though, trying to escape from this place, pretty much everything just kills your ass. So I think that covers most of what you need to know about the story. And all I have to say for myself is that I actually think it's awesome. I mean, I really dig the idea of this one. And for the most part, everything is usually done pretty well, although I do have a couple complaints. But I'm gonna get there in a moment. And as for the characters, I think a lot of them are actually pretty cool. Even though a lot of them are just fucking nut jobs. They are at least pretty entertaining characters, and they actually can be pretty fun at times. Now, before we continue on and talk about how awesome this one is, there are some complaints. Now, quite possibly, one of the biggest flaws within this show has to be the ending. Now, like I said in the review for Pandora Hearts, I don't really talk about the ending much, but I'll only talk about it briefly if I have to. So what I have to say about the ending here is that it fucking sucks. And it's a damn shame that it has to have a shitty ending because everything else about the show is actually pretty awesome. Now, I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens at the end, but all I have to say is that it's one of those endings where it just completely cheaps out. I'm willing to bet you probably know the kind of ending this is. So here's one example I'll explain, is that in the ending of Sonic 06, which is by the way a terrible game, the ending to that game was that everything was all a dream and therefore everything else was just all for nothing. But in this case it is pretty similar to that, although no, it's not actually a dream. But it's one of those shitty endings where it doesn't really solve anything. But as for the second complaint, it actually goes hand in hand with this, is that there's a lot of plot holes, and I think most of the reasons why there are plot holes is that, well, they had to make that shitty ending. Because originally, the series was supposed to go on longer, but there were some issues. Now, I have heard that during the production of this show, a lot of the writers were on strike. And to make matters worse, apparently in Japan, the show just did not do very well, so they never bothered to continue it. But other than that, the story is actually pretty great, so yeah, it's unfortunate that it's one of those animes where everything is awesome until the ending. So let's get moving on to other things like the animation, and all I have to say is that the animation actually does look really good. I mean, everything is dark and gritty, which suits the theme, well, except for all the happy things. And the character designs are really cool looking for the most part, and the fight scenes are also very cool looking. And some of the death scenes are pretty insane, so with that being said, I actually don't have much complaints about the animation whatsoever. Now as for the show's music, it's actually pretty damn great. As again, I don't have much complaints about it, but it definitely does suit the show. Now as for the opening theme song, I actually really like it myself. It's a pretty dark sounding song, and weirdly enough, it's actually in English. It's not very often that I hear an anime opening that actually has English lyrics. Now yeah, there are some that just take the same song and translate them into English, but this one is just pure English. And funny enough, the band was actually called Deadman Wonderland, but it also featured another band called Fade. So I found that to be pretty interesting, and same thing with the ending theme, it was actually done by Deadman Wonderband, but it featured another band called Gillis, I think that's how you say it. Honestly, I have no idea, and I've never heard of them before. So yeah, I actually really like the opening theme song. Now as for the voice acting, all I have to say is that it's actually pretty decent. So Gonta is being played by Greg Aris, and he actually does a pretty decent job, surprisingly. Now, I know, he's a really whiny character, just like a lot of the other characters that Greg Aris plays. But this is something I can at least understand him being whiny for, considering that he's just an innocent person that just happened to be stuck in the shittiest situation ever. So I found it worked pretty well here. I mean, it's not like it's Tomoki from Heaven's Lost Property, because that guy's just an annoying little shit. And then Shiro is being played by Monica Ryle, and she also does a pretty good job. She definitely does suit the character. Now, as for one thing I just realized is that the two main cast here is the exact same two main cast from Another. Now, personally, I actually prefer the roles that they did in Another compared to this, but this one is actually still pretty good. Well, at least for its main cast anyways. So then you got Eric Vale playing Tusanaga, and while he actually does a good job at being crazy and an asshole. And then Mikana, who is one of the elite bodyguards, is being played by Colleen Clickenbread. Yeah, that's a really weird last name. Now, I'm not very familiar with her, but all I have to say is that she actually did a really good job here. And funny enough, before I looked up the cast, I actually could have sworn it was Tara Platt, because it almost sounds exactly like her, which is actually pretty awesome, so yeah, don't have any complaints with her. And then Senji is being played by Patrick Sates, and all I have to say is that that's actually pretty awesome. He always does a good job of playing a very intense character. And then the Owl is being played by Michael J. Tatum, which is also very good. And finally, I'll mention is Azuma, and he's being played by Jason Douglas. I find he does a really good job as him, very suits the role. Now as for the rest of the cast, they're actually not bad, but I do find they're not as memorable as some of the ones I just mentioned. Now a lot of the other ones that are in here, they are good voice actors, I just find they just weren't as good as some of the other ones. But overall, I have to say that the voice acting is actually pretty decent. But now, as for the overall score, I'm gonna give this one a 7 out of 10. Now you're all probably thinking, wait, a 7 out of all the good things that you've said about this one? Now honestly, if this show didn't have that stupid fucking ending, this would easily get like an 8 or a 9. But it's unfortunate that it just has to taint the whole thing. Well, maybe not the whole thing. And I have a feeling that it's definitely way different than the manga's ending. Now I do have a couple volumes of it, but I haven't read them all yet. But I can easily tell you that the mangas are fucking fantastic. Now one thing that does kind of suck is that the show actually did cut out some pretty key characters within the mangas. But if you can get over that change, I'd still say the show is pretty good for what it is, it's just you kind of had to expect a shit ending. but I am giving it a 7 because it's at least fun enough, and it does have some good animation, good setting, good music. So in a way, some might say I'm being harsh, but in another way, some people might be saying I'm a bit generous. I just really wish they would have at least done a second season of it, but that probably won't ever happen, unfortunately. But I don't know, maybe sometime down the road we might see a reboot. So with that being said, the show on its own is not bad at all, but yeah, like I already said a bunch of times, the ending is just pure crap.